On Linux, we have a lot of really fantastic shells to choose from. We have Bash and Fish and ZSH and dozens of others. And one of the new, more modern shells that I've been wanting to play with and do a deeper dive into is the Xonsh shell. Now, Xonsh is a Python-powered shell, so it allows you to actually execute Python code directly into the shell. Now, Xonsh is cross-platform, so even though I'm using it on Linux, Xonsh is available on both Mac and Windows as well. And according to the blurb here on their homepage, Xonsh is meant for daily use of experts and novices. So you don't have to be some super genius or some Pythonista to use Xonsh. In fact, I don't know really much Python code at all, but I'd like to learn a little more Python. That's partly why I'm thinking about switching over to using Xonsh as my daily driver as far as my shell. Right now I use the Fish shell, but I think I'm going to live in Xonsh for a while. So let's go ahead and get it installed. Now I'm on an Arch Linux based system. I'm using CachyOS, which is a Arch based distro. And to install Xonsh on a Arch distro, it's a little different than what you might expect. You might expect to do a standard sudo pacman -S conch. There is a conch package in the repos. You could install it, but that's not really how you should run it. And Arch is going to complain when you try to execute conch that way because it's a Python program and they expect Python programs to be run inside virtual environments. So we need to create a virtual environment. So I'm going to create this virtual environment here using Python -m v, creating a virtual environment, and then the location to a directory that it's going to create, and that directory will be our virtual environment. And I'm going to do this in my home directory /conch-env will be the directory, and that virtual environment was created. And now I could run something like this command here, .conch-env/bin. There's a bin folder in there, and it contains some binaries like the Python binary and the pip binary to install packages. And of course, conch itself will be in there once we actually install it, but it's not installed yet. So let's do a conch-env/bin pip, which is the Python package manager. It installs Python programs for us. And let's do a pip install conch. And then this is very important. Install this package here, prompt-toolkit. If you don't install this, you could have some weird graphical glitches in the conch shell. For me, I forgot to install it when I was testing it out earlier, and I had some weird issues when I was up arrowing through the shell history, and it wouldn't fully delete the previous commands. Like I would get the up arrow for the previous command, but the command that was already in the prompt would still be showing, and it was just really weird. So make sure you install conch and prompt toolkit. And for me, I'm also going to go ahead and install one extra package. I'm going to install contrib-prompt-starship because I like using the Starship prompt. This here in the Fish shell, this is the Starship prompt. So I'm going to install the contrib prompt starship package to use Starship inside the conch shell. Let's go ahead and run that command, and it installed those packages. And now if I want to launch the conch shell, all I need to do is run the command conch-env/bin conch. And now it switches us from Fish over into the conch shell. This is conch out of the box. Now, this is not the Starship prompt. This is your standard prompt that comes with conch. But if I wanted to load the contrib prompt starship package, I would contrib and then load prompt_starship, and it loads the Starship prompt here in conch. Also, when you first launch conch, you've got this stuff here at the top, this little help information on how to configure conch. You have config web, which launches a web configuration in your browser, and it allows you to basically use a web configuration to set theming and stuff. You have config tutorial, which is the conch documentation. It just opens that in the browser. I have my browser open actually on a second monitor, and if I run config web, well, it actually does not work. That should have launched the web configuration tool, but we get an error. And I'm kind of glad it gave me an error because you're going to get this error too. But the great thing about Python error messages, it tells you what's going on. There is no module named pigments. Well, let's install pigments. So you remember how to install things inside the virtual environment. We need to do a .conch-env bin pip and then install, and then let's install the pigments package. And now that I've done that, let's up arrow and let's run config web. And now that launched this in my Brave browser here. And the first page is the colors. Choose a color scheme. So I like one dark. That's what my terminal is using. So let's click on that. And do we want to update the conch color style variable? Sure. Hit that, and it just wrote something to the conch config, right? It manually did that for you. It writes to a file called .conch RC, I believe, in your home directory. You could also play around with settings for the prompt. You could choose a specific prompt. Now for me, I already knew the prompt I wanted to use. I already installed the package for Starship. It's actually going to be in contribs because that was what I installed, this contrib prompt _ Starship. We also have variables we could set. We could assign values to various variables. We could go ahead and add aliases manually here as well. Now for me, I'm not going to use the web configuration. I'm actually just going to go into the actual config files themselves and do some stuff. So I'm going to close out of this and let's go ahead and kill that process running there. So let me go ahead and I'm going to open this in Emacs because I don't think my Vim, NeoVim aliases, I don't have aliases set in this shell just yet. So let's open the .conch.rc file using Emacs. And let me go ahead and kill that split here and zoom in. This is what just happened. When we ran config web and we chose the one dark color scheme, it wrote this automatically to this file, this .conch.rc file in our home directory. Now remember that I had to manually load the Starship prompt. I don't want to have to manually load the Starship prompt every time I launch Conch. I would rather that, auto start. So I could just add that line, that contrib load prompt Starship, right? I could add that to my conch.rc file. That way I never have to worry about that. Matter of fact, now that I've written that, let me actually see if that works. Let me kill all of this and restart the terminal and let me up arrow, let me rerun conch, and it did automatically start the Starship prompt. Now, I would also like my color script random program to run. When I do my fish shell or my bash shell or ZSH shell, I always have color scripts, random color scripts that appear in each new terminal. I want that to happen in conch as well. So let me go ahead and launch conch again, and let me go ahead and get back into Emacs. Let me just open a separate instance of Emacs and get into the conch.rc file here. And let me zoom in, and what I could do is I could just have it run color script space random. Let me write that and let me exit out of conch and let me relaunch conch, and now I get a random color script. It looks a little weird because I'm zoomed in, but that actually worked. And then none of my aliases are working in conch. So if I wanted to add my bash aliases into conch, what I would do is I would do, well, let's open up a second instance of Emacs here. I could go into my bash RC. I could go down into the section where I have all of my aliases. I have this huge block of aliases toward the end of my bash RC. I could just do a copy and paste into that. And I believe all of that should work because the conch.rc file does accept this style of formatting for aliases. So it's very similar to your bash RC and your fish RC and all of that. But here's the thing with conch. Because it is supposed to be a Python powered shell, you probably don't want to use this plain standard format of a RC file for your conch config. You probably want to write a proper Python config for conch, and that's what I'm going to do. And to do this, what you need to do is you need to actually create a file. So let me go ahead and launch my file manager here. Inside your home folder /.config/conch, it's empty right now. Go ahead and create a folder called rc.d, and then inside that folder, create rc.py. You need this file here. That was interesting. Did it create that automatically when I created the directory? I actually did not expect that. Is there anything in here? No, there is not anything in here, but I can put something in here. This is actually what I'm going to paste in here. Let me make this full screen. And I've already done this file for myself. So this is what the config would look like in Python. So remember the line where we set the theme to one dark? This is how it would be using Python formatting. Remember how we set the Starship prompt to auto load? This is how we do that using Python formatting. We run this function contribs_load. Now make sure if you're going to do that, you need this module imported. So you need to do an import here of the contribs_load module. And then I assign variables to various values. It's very similar to how you assign variables to values in Bash scripting, right? It looks a little different. You use __conch__.env, and then you have variable name, in this case editor. What is the editor variable? Well, it runs this Emacs command. What does the visual variable do? It runs this Emacs command. What does the fuzzy finder default ops, what are those assigned to? Well, it's assigned to all of this, yada, yada, yada. It's actually not that complicated. I went ahead and assigned a variable man pager, which is a standard variable in your shell. What is actually the program used to read man pages? By default on most Linux systems, it's going to be the less command, but I prefer using neovim to read my man pages, so that's what I'm assigning as the man pager. And then that huge block of aliases, I just did a strict copy and paste from my bash rc over into my rc.py. The only thing that changes is the beginning. You have __conch__.aliases, and then inside brackets, inside single quotes, the alias name, and then what you're assigning that alias to, right? Very simple. And if you don't want to go through the trouble of changing all this yourself, maybe you don't know how to do sed substitutions or vim substitutions, you could just copy over your entire bash RC over into a chat assistant like ChatGPT. And ChatGPT, within less than a second, will just spit out an rc.py formatted correctly for you with all your aliases copied over just fine. Now, obviously, be careful when you're using AI tools, but for something like this, I would say it's rather safe. And it's probably the way I would go if I was going to convert something from one scripting language into another scripting language, and I really didn't want to take the time to do it myself. But I also can understand the code. That way I can spot if there's any problems here, and everything to me looks all right here. And now that I've got all of this set, let me go ahead and write that, and let's go ahead and quit out of all of this and get back over into this workspace, and let me go ahead and relaunch Conch. So let's launch back into Conch. I get my random color script. I get the Starship prompt here. And now let's see if my aliases work. ls should be the EZA command, and it is. When I do something like vim.bashrc, it should actually be neovim that runs, and it is. So it looks like most of my aliases are working, and I say most of my aliases are working because I know some of my aliases are not going to work. For example, let me make, I'll actually just cd into my downloads directory. I have a alias in my fish config, bash config, zsh config, where ... just takes me to the parent directory, and it does that here in Conch as well. But let me up arrow cd back into downloads. I had another alias for ... which takes me up to the grandparent directory, right? It takes me up 2 levels. That does not work because this alias, even though I have it set in my config in my rc.py, the 3 dots is an ellipsis in Python, right? This actually does something in Python, right? So the Python interpreter is not going to evaluate that as an alias. It's just going to think I did an ellipsis. The same thing, I have these kinds of aliases as well in my config, .2 and .3 and .4. They're not going to do anything here. If I try to run this alias .4, which should take me up 4 directory levels, is the way this works, I'm just going to get this return 0.4 because that's what Python interprets that as. It interprets it as a number. It doesn't interpret it as an alias. So I'm going to have to redo some of those aliases. There's 4 or 5 aliases that I'm going to have to change. But for the most part, like, you know, I've got 100 probably aliases, maybe more than 100 aliases. All of them are going to work except these that are kind of strange and unique aliases. Now, why would you want to run Conch? Well, again, if you're somebody that wants to leverage some of the power of Python, you could do some interesting things here. So here are some examples that I pulled from the web. Here's one. We can echo the answer is, and then the @ symbol inside parentheses, 21 times 2. The @ symbol basically, hey, evaluate this as Python, right? So the answer is, and hopefully we get the answer is 42. We did not. It just actually, it didn't do anything here. I wonder if we take this out of the parentheses, this might be one of those things where what I got from the web was wrong. But if I do it that way, yeah, that works. Here's an interesting little bit of code. Now, can you see what this is going to do? We're going to create an empty file with the touch command. And then the @ symbol is, hey, do this using Python, evaluate this as Python. So we're going to touch my underscore file is the name of the file. And then we're going to dot upper parentheses. So we're going to run this function here, the upper function. What does that mean? It's going to uppercase my file. So instead of creating my underscore file, it's going to do my underscore file all uppercase, and then plus we're concatenating .txt to the end of that file. And I believe that's, if I'm reading that right, that should, yeah, it created my underscore file all uppercase .txt. Maybe you want to run the ls command, on a bunch of directories, directory 1, directory 2, yada, 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 like you would do, in standard kind of a shell format. But if you wanted to do it more a Python way, right, what you could do is the @ symbol inside parentheses, and you could just give it a list using Python, right? So you could do single quotes /etc/passwd, comma, and then in single quotes /etc/host, comma, and then the next directory, and that gives you the ls for those directories. And of course, you could create, more complicated things, more complicated functions and loops and stuff inside the shell here directly, loops and things that use Python. So, that may be something, especially if you're one of these people that do spend a lot of time with Python, I think you're going to appreciate Xonsh. Now for me, if I'm going to live in Xonsh all the time, I need to make this my user's default shell, because right now, anytime I launch a terminal, I'm launched directly into the fish shell. And the reason is if I echo $shell, my user's default shell is what this is getting. My user's default shell is /bin/fish. So anytime my user, if I'm logged in as DT, anytime he gets a terminal, right, he gets the fish shell. So I need to change that, right? So how do we change that? Well, this is going to be complicated because most of the time you would do a change shell command. Let's do change shell -l for list. Here are the available shells that I could use. And you notice Xonsh is not there. We have bash, fish, and zsh, right? But no Xonsh. Why is Xonsh not there? It's because we didn't install Xonsh as a native Arch package using Pacman. It's not in the /etc/shells file because that's where all of this information gets pulled from a file on your system called /etc/shells. Because we installed Xonsh inside that Python virtual environment, it didn't get added to that file, but we can manually add it to that file. So let's go ahead and sudo vim /etc/shells. Now, we got to give our sudo password. And now what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go to the last line and I'm going to go ahead and add, I need to add the full path to this. So /home/det/.conch-env. Remember, that was the virtual environment /bin/conch. That's the executable for the shell. And let me write and quit out of that. And now when I run the change shell -l command for a list of all our available shells, you can see that we have that there. And let me actually just go ahead and do a quick control C, or actually a shift control C in the terminal to copy, because what I want to do is I want to do now a change shell -s for set, and I want to set my user shell to the conch-env/bin/conch binary here. And of course I have to give a password. And now what I need to do, I need to reboot the machine. And once I reboot the machine, every time I open a terminal, I will be in Xonsh. And I'm going to live in Xonsh. I'm going to drive it as my main shell, at least for a few weeks, if not longer term, because I'm quite fascinated. And again, I think I want to do a deeper dive, not just in the Xonsh shell, but just Python as a language as well. And then do more, Python-y things here inside Linux, because it is one of the most common, if not the most common language people use to create things in Linux, not just scripting, command line scripts, but also graphical programs. Both GTK and Qt programs are often written in Python. Obviously, the window manager I'm using right now, Qtile, is actually a Python program. It's written and configured entirely in Python, so I need to spend a little more time learning the language. Now, before I go, I need to thank a few special people. I need to thank the producers of this episode: Matt, Steve, 40mm, Cap Caveman, Darloff, Lee, Jersey Killer, Mark, Methos, Arion, Paul, Peace Arch, and Fedora, Realities for Less, Red Prophet, Roland, Wargento, and Ubuntu, and Willie. These guys, they're my highest tiered patrons over on Patreon. Without these guys, this quick introduction to the Xonsh shell would not have been possible. The show is also brought to you by all of these fine ladies and gentlemen. All these names you're seeing on the screen, these are my supporters over on Patreon, because I don't have any corporate sponsors. I'm sponsored by you guys, the community. If you like my work and want to see more videos about free and open source software like Xonsh, subscribe to DistroTube over on Patreon. Peace, guys.